Anin, Sego. Hello everyone and happy Saturday. Thanks so much for joining me for this week's installment of our budget friendly meals. Today we're going to be making tomato spinach one pot pasta. So the ingredients we're going to need for this week's recipe include 4 cups of vegetable broth, which is pretty well the same as the full carton, 2 tablespoons of olive oil. We're going to use fettuccine for today's recipe, 8 ounces of frozen chopped spinach, 1 can of diced tomatoes. We're going to use 1 yellow onion and we're just going to slice that up. We're also going to use 4 cloves of garlic, and the garlic we want to make sure we mince it. And then we're also going to use half a tablespoon of both basil and oregano, and then a 1/4 teaspoon of crushed red pepper just to give it that little extra kick. And then we'll use some Parmesan cheese towards the end, right before we serve the dish. In addition to the ingredients, there are, as usual, a few other things you're going to need to grab from around the kitchen. These include a large pot. This recipe is fantastic because we really aren't going to be dirtying too many dishes. And I don't know about you, but I get really excited about that idea. We're going to also need a knife and a cutting board. We'll need a can opener, and then I wrote down wooden spoon, but really you could use anything that you like to stir your pasta with. You'll see that I've got a little bit of a different spoon that I like to use. And then we're going to need measuring spoons. So specifically you'll need a 1/2 tablespoon and then a 1/4 teaspoon. So before we get started, let's take a quick look at the cost breakdown for this week's recipe. As you know, we do what we can to make sure that we split things up. So for example, when we purchased the onions, we actually purchased a bag of onions, but there are approximately 8 to 9 onions per bag. So when you break it down that way, the onion itself that we're using in today's recipe equaled out to be 32 cents. Now, when you take into consideration all of the ingredients for this week's recipe, with tax, the total equals $6.69 for the meal. Because the recipe makes 6 servings, you can then divide that by 6, which works out to be $1.12 per person for this week's meal. So now that we've got that part out of the way, go ahead, grab your ingredients and the items from around the kitchen you're going to need to cook up this delicious dish, and then meet me back here and we'll go ahead and get started on the recipe. Okay, so I've got my garlic and my onions already sliced and minced. I've got this 1 large pot that we're going to use for this week's recipe, so let's go ahead and get started. The first thing I'm going to do is add in the vegetable broth. I'm going to use the whole carton, which is just shy of the 4 cups that we're going to need for the recipe. Next, I'll add in my diced tomatoes. And now my onions. I've left them sort of large, that way if anyone in my house isn't really wanting the onions, they are more than welcome to pick them out. Garlic has gone in, and now 2 tablespoons of the olive oil. The olive oil helps to not have our pasta stick to each other while it's cooking. Now, I don't know what happened. My brain said 1/2 teaspoon, but it's actually 1/2 tablespoon. So do not follow what I'm doing here. You actually want 1/2 tablespoon. And then for the crushed red pepper flakes, we are definitely only going with a 1/4 teaspoon. And move some of this out of the way real quick. Put some lids back onto some items. Fantastic. I'm going to go ahead and give this a nice stir. I want to make sure that we get everything mixed well together before we add our fettuccine in. Took me a little bit to get it open, and that's all right. I think I'm going to start with about half of the package. Not too sure why I thought I was going to be able to break that in half. I overthought my muscles here. Grab some of that fettuccine, snap it in half, and drop it into your pot. Give everything a stir. We need to make sure that our pasta is actually underneath of all of the liquid. We want to make sure that there's none sticking out over top. So I've actually put in about 2/3 of the bag. And now it's time to add in our spinach. You could use one of the blocks or you can use two. I'm going to go with both because I'm totally fine with adding some of that extra Popeye strength into the dish. Clearly, I need some of that extra spinach to help me build up my muscles so that in the future I'll be able to break down that fettuccine. Grab your lid, pop it on top, and then turn your heat on to high. We want to make sure that we leave this covered until we bring everything to a boil. Whew, this is starting to smell delicious. So it's only been a couple minutes. I've got a good boil happening, so I'm going to go ahead, remove the lid, turn the heat down to medium, and give everything a stir. For this particular recipe, you're going to want to make sure that every couple of minutes you're giving it a stir just to make sure that your noodles aren't sticking to the bottom of the pot. Be careful not to over stir, because if you do, that's what happens, or that's what causes our noodles to actually become sticky. So we'll give it a couple minutes before we go ahead and stir it up some more, but you're going to definitely want to keep an eye on this, at least for the next 10 to 15 minutes. Just continue to stir it every few minutes. What we want to do is have all of that liquid start to absorb and our noodles start to cook. So you can see that most of my liquid has now absorbed. So again, I'm going to give this a stir. It is starting to stick to the bottom of the pot, which tells me that my noodles are pretty well done. I'm going to go ahead and turn off of my heat, and I'm just going to set this over to the side and grab some dishes to serve this up to my family. As you can see, we've gone ahead and sprinkled some of that delicious fresh Parmesan cheese over top. But there you have your tomato spinach one-pot pasta dish. We hope you enjoyed this week's recipe, and until next time, Ona!